Now, Melvyn Bragg presents a new series which examines the relationship between soldiers and religion and how the two are being pushed apart in times of conflict.
Hello, in this series we'll look at how professional people in different spheres bring religion into their everyday lives, how they make religious ideals practical, and whether they have to deal with conflicts of interest between their faith and their work. This week we're looking at the armed forces. War and religion are increasingly growing apart in modern British society. Gone are the days when Britain saw war as a great crusade, as in 1915 when the Bishop of London controversially preached that we must kill the good as well as the bad to save the world. Before the most recent conflict in the Gulf, several prominent members of the clergy publicly questioned the moral basis for war. But if some Christians are finding it difficult to reconcile the wars Britain enters into with their religious principles, what's it like for those who are religious within the armed forces? What role does religion play for soldiers when they're facing death or in great danger? Are battlefields godless places? And what responsibility do religious leaders have in deciding whether or not we go to war? With me to discuss the relationship between the armed forces and religion is the Bishop of London, Richard Charters, the Senior Army Chaplain for Northern Ireland, the Reverend Dr. David Coulter, and also with me is the Adjutant General, Lieutenant General Sir Alistair Irwin, one of Britain's most senior army officers. Padre David, why did you choose to go into the armed forces?
I'd grown up in a Christian home. I went to university and as an army scholar, and I had lots of friends who were training ministers. And I went off to the army, and this niggling idea about going into the church wouldn't go away, and eventually reached the stage where I felt I would have to resign my commission and go back to be a theological student.
When you went from, as it were, the army into the church, although you stayed in the service, did you feel you were crossing a line? You were a different sort of, you're wearing uniform, you're a different sort of soldier?
I think I've always felt that God's kingdom doesn't stop the day you put on an army uniform. And therefore it was a very natural transition, but it was the right thing for me to do. And I think also I felt that it was something that the church were keen for me to do. I resigned my commission, I left the army, and went off to be a student. I had no responsibility to come back to the army, but I felt ultimately that's what God wanted me to do.
Do you think that the core values of the army coincide with or are much the same as the core values of Christianity?
Well, I do. The core values, as I'm sure you know, for us, selfless commitment, courage, discipline, integrity, loyalty, respect for others. I don't think you necessarily find all those words in the Bible in that way, but I'm quite certain that the meaning is exactly in accordance with religious teachings. But Christianity certainly, but the army is a multi-faith organization, and I think that our core values, in fact I'm sure they are, they would also resonate with people of other faiths as well as Christians.
Bishop Richard, it seems to be difficult, more and more difficult these days, in this country, to reconcile aspects of, let's stick with Christianity for the moment, to some of the things that the British government requires the British Army to do. Why do you think that a tidal change has occurred, let's say, since the wars, the big wars, the First World War, the Second World War?
In the Christian tradition, there's always been a tension between the great commandment against killing, thou shalt not kill, and lethal violence. Clearly, Israel in the Bible went to war. That commandment was chiefly aimed at lethal violence that was private and unauthorized by any state authority. But nevertheless, there's always been a tension in the Christian tradition. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the relationship between the military forces and the Christian faith has always got to be properly uneasy. And indeed, if it were too collusive, it would not be doing its job.
Do you find, Padre David, that, let's take the recent opposition of some of the senior clergy, or at the very least, serious reservations about the Gulf War. Do you find that disturbs the people who are in the army who've got to go out there and do the job in the name of the British people?
I think increasingly soldiers are very aware of what public opinion is saying, and I think prior to the last Gulf War, soldiers would have conversations with each other and with chaplains and their officers about, you know, whether it was right to be going to war. And I think soldiers are thinking men today, unquestionably. I think what the Bishop was just saying, that what we call the CNN effect, is very evident, that their families are seeing as much of the battlefield and probably more than the man sitting in the front trenches. And I think increasingly that, as far as the church is concerned, that I've had conversations with soldiers who were very happy that senior church leaders were asking quite difficult questions before the war happened. But once it started, we felt it was the role of the church and the society to get behind the soldier and help him in the task that he was asked to do.
I think there are two things. One is you've got a certain responsibility, a pastoral responsibility towards people who are under discipline, under command, facing huge challenges. So that's obviously something you've got to be aware of. Also, while the church has the responsibility to state as it sees it what the components of the moral argument are, we're nevertheless not politicians. We're not privy to intelligence information. We don't get the full picture. And therefore, we also must observe and respect the limits on our capacity to finally judge a situation. I don't think anyone was in any doubt about the general attitude of the bishops of the Church of England to this particular declaration, this particular decision. But we accepted the limits, that we didn't have the full picture, and at the point when war started, the pastoral responsibility was predominant.
Mm. And you find that again in this latest war, you found that that was effective as a platform of support?
Well, effective, but as I say, also essential. You know, I think it would be very, very difficult now, if ever it would have been easy, very difficult now to send men into battle if the whole weight of public and religious opinion at home was against the business. You know, once the thing had started, I think it would be very, very difficult for the commanders in the field to carry the thing through.
But actually, that is in many ways rather good news, isn't it? So there's a very important sanction, and the moral debate is absolutely crucial. I mean, that is part of the implication of the way in which the armed services are less insulated now than they were, for quite obvious reasons connected with media coverage, and therefore the moral argument has to be won. And it's one of the many reasons why in a democratic society, thank God, it's much more difficult to go to war than it is in a dictatorship.
And we'd much rather not go to war unless there had been a debate, because then that would be, in some sense, mindless.
In your experience, General, when men are about to go into battle, those who have a strong faith, do you think this helps them in the duty of going into battle? Do you think they're stronger for it?
Oh, I'm sure they must be. People with a very strong faith can face all kinds of dangers, knowing that even if the worst happens to them as individuals, somehow or other, all will be well, both for them and their families and so on. So I think they have a very strong ab initio position. What's so interesting, of course, is the effect on those who don't generally think of the Almighty on a daily basis, who, when about to face the mortal danger, suddenly remember that he exists. And then they turn to him. And, of course, you know, a lot of people would say that's tremendously sort of cynical, but I think it's just tremendously human. You know, you need something suddenly to give you that extra degree of comfort.
There's a nice story told about there were 5 chaplains on a troop ship going to the Falklands, and they decided on the ship that every morning they would meet to say prayers together. And as they went on the troop ship towards the Ascension Island, it became evident that this operation was definitely going to happen. And there were so many people wanted to come to the morning prayer that they met on a flight deck. There were so many there. They went to the Falklands, they did what was asked of them. A number were killed, they came back, and the number of chaplains, all of whom survived, were back in the cabin on their own, and nobody wanted to attend any more of the services.
So what does that say to you, Bishop Richard?
Well, it says to me something very, very human and not surprising, that when you're facing huge challenges, then very often you think beyond yourself. You're decentered in a certain kind of way. So you're more alert, you're more aware, you're more sensitive, where that kind of horizon tends to get clouded over, and I think that that's very understandable.
Given that people are coming to these congregations, which we can use the word properly, in rarely and at extreme moments, what parts, and you're reading from the Bible, what parts of the Bible are most helpful?
I think soldiers are pretty traditional by nature, and soldiers will hang on to Sunday school stories, the David and Goliath stories. Soldiers will respond to the passage in Ephesians where it talks about putting on the armour of God, having truth as a belt, having the shield of faith. These are things that soldiers can identify with. There are lots of stories in the Gospels where Jesus had conversations with the soldier, the centurion. There's a passage in Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 3, where a soldier came to Jesus and said, "What about us?" And soldiers still ask those questions, even they may be the most irreligious people around. They may be not very keen on going to church, but they will ask religious questions. And somebody's got to be there to address those questions. And certainly in any operation I've ever been on, I find that the chaplain and other religious people will be asked those questions.
Thank you. We'll just take a short break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
It's not crystal. Silk, not fresh. Those lights are very bright. Seat's too hard. Last season's colours. That hedge needs a trim.
Whatever you want to do broadband.
Since time began, man has been drinking Volvic mineral water from volcanoes to give him volcanicity. Volvic, filtered through layers of volcanic rock to fill in volcanicity.
The world needs more energy and lower greenhouse gas emissions. And only one kind of power can deliver them both. That's why Esso spends more on research than any other energy company.
To see if you could save up to £199 with AA car insurance, just ask. Call 0800 294 7777 or buy online.
Want to be faster? Get full-speed broadband for just £17.99 a month with free modem and connection. Visit wannado.co.uk for details. Be nice to travel from the airport without worrying about what your hotel's going to be like. Your time away is just too precious. Thompson.
The English. The French. Oh, you gave us cricket and punt. You gave us French toast and sachet d'Estelle. The bowler. The beret. More dancing. Mine. You ride donkeys. You eat horses. We have got the best football team. We'll see.
France, England, live next Sunday, 7:15, ITV1.
I suppose one thing that viewers would like to have your opinion on is, do you find, when it comes to it, that people who have soldiers who have faith are Now, I'm going to choose those words carefully because one isn't saying braver, one isn't saying more resolute, but are different from. Let's leave it at different from. Have a different view, have a different take on the war than those who do not superficially have faith.
I think that when the whistle blows, as it were, and the game starts, I don't think it's possible to discern any difference. Everyone is doing a difficult job, and they get on with it, and it's only before and after. I think the approach to battle, probably those with a very profound faith are approaching it in a calmer kind of a way, and afterwards they're probably capable of dealing with it themselves in a calmer sort of way. But when it comes to it, the important bit for a military commander is what happens when the whistle goes, and I don't think it would be possible to discern one from the other. Everyone's getting on with their job in the best possible way.
I think from the chaplaincy perspective, one of the things that we have found is that the very fact that chaplains are embedded in units, so you're posted to somewhere, you will train with the people and you will deploy on the operation with the people. You will be the only welfare officer on the battlefield if it comes to that. But you are there, you are known by the soldiers, you share their experiences with them, and they will naturally ask you those questions. They will naturally turn to you for help in those moments of dread.
Yeah, in the Black Watch, my regiment, we have a wonderful watercolour of the first chaplain ever appointed to a Highland regiment called Adam Ferguson. And the picture depicts a scene at the Battle of Fontenoy. And there is Adam Ferguson in his clericals, holding the hand of a dying Highlander, and in the other hand is his Bible. And clipped to his side is his sword. And the story goes that after the Highlander had finally died, Adam Ferguson put his Bible in the other hand, drew his sword, and charged into battle to help the men. Now, I don't think that we'd quite approve of that nowadays, but it did very much illustrate what David just said, that, you know, the chaplains are with us. They're there in the heat of it. And I think in that way, Adam Ferguson demonstrated a wonderful blend of being with the men physically and spiritually.
On a more mundane level, General, do you think that those soldiers who are openly religious are rather outsiders?
No, I don't think so. I don't know that they're enormously numerous. But in a way that would make them more of an outsider, being in a sort of minority. But I don't think so. We're a very tolerant lot in the army, really. We have lots and lots of different people with different kinds of foibles, and they're all accepted. And those that show overt religious faith are accepted just as much as those who show none at all. I mean, I suppose there's the natural suspicion of people who come and, as it were, thrust it down your throat at every available opportunity. But that happens in society at large, doesn't it? And no, there's no soldier, as far as I know, who's at a disadvantage because he expresses faith.
We have a wonderful organisation called the Naval, Military and Air Force Bible Society. And the Bible Society gives us, as chaplains, free Bibles to distribute to soldiers. They now produce a small pocket-sized New Testament in a camouflage cover, which is very attractive for soldiers. And when I was in Bosnia, every Sunday, deliberately, I would lay out 24 of these on a table. It was where the library was, so people had an excuse to come and pick up books. And they always disappeared. Not all of them, but there was 2 or 3 would go, and I'd replenish them. They'd always go. And soldiers were taking them, not just as trophies, but I know were quietly reading them when they had a moment and, you know, not doing anything else. And their friends respected that.
So that brings us to the question, where do you think the ultimate authority for the soldier resides?
Well, I would say the ultimate authority, which is mediated through international law, comes from the divine law, from natural law, from something that is codified in various ways, in conventions, in case law of the kind I've been talking about, the Nuremberg laws. So that forms the framework for what we do. But of course, operationally speaking, we hope the orders that are being given are within that framework, and people have studied it very closely, and therefore the soldier responds to the immediate order that's been given.
What about you, Padre? Where would you say?
I see myself very much as a man under authority. You'd expect me to say that, with the general sitting on this side and the bishop on this side, perhaps. But chaplains have often been referred to as having dual nationality. I'm a servant of the church first and foremost. I'm also a servant of the military. I'm only in the military because my church allows me to be a chaplain in the forces and to the forces. And therefore, I'm sanctioned on both sides, if you like. the army recognises the fact that there is what is called the moral component of fighting power. And I feel I'm not there to bless the ammunition, I'm there to support pastorally and spiritually those who are asked to do the fighting.
Yes, and as a military commander, I mean, there's no question which authority predominates. It must be that of the commanding officer, otherwise you can't run a hierarchical thing, and you certainly can't get people to do things they'd rather not do in times of danger and that sort of thing, without that very clear understanding that orders is orders. But underpinned, I absolutely agree with the bishop when he says that we must assume that the orders are correct on that basis. But also, everybody, each one of us, has the opportunity to express a conscience and say, well, all right, it may be a legitimate order, it may be legal, but in my heart, I don't think that this is something I can take part in which case, as I said before, it's very rare in my experience that these things have happened, but should it happen, I hope very much that we would respect that and say, well, all right, if you can't do it, somebody else will, but get you back down the line.
How would you have felt, though, if the Bishop of London had denounced bombings, the actual bombing in Iraq in the recent conflict there?
Well, I would have kept my fingers crossed that the men out in the Gulf hadn't heard the condemnation before they'd finished the job, because as I said earlier, I think it would sort of kind of undermine people, particularly if it was more than just one voice. I mean, if it was the representation of a complete view, I think that would be very unsettling. But then, assuming that everything had happened happily, I would hope that perhaps one day he would have consented to have a conversation to find out, so that we could understand his point of view and he could understand why it wasn't very helpful.
I said at the beginning of this programme that war and religion are increasingly growing apart in modern British society. Let's assume that they are. What will the consequences be for us going to war, do you think? Starting with you.
I think it's going to become more and more difficult. This is not only, of course, fundamental religious convictions, it's also what happens when a society has had the very happy experience of largely being free from lethal conflict and violence on its own soil now for more than 50 years. I think that is actually influencing public opinion to a very great extent. But I think in a democracy, it is extremely difficult to take people to war, although I noticed that everybody was saying recently that one of the great challenges of the United States of America was going to be to persuade its citizens to embark on war beyond its borders. And 9/11 has changed that situation very profoundly, and that there is a constituency which is prepared to support that kind of action. So I think that it very much depends on how personally threatened people feel. I think there is an enormous distaste for adventures where people don't feel themselves to be under immediate threat.
I think I would still hope that the church would feel it right that they would allow me to go and serve in the military, that they would still recognise the fact that soldiers are in extreme positions, that they are far from home often, that they do have spiritual needs, and that I would like to be in a position to do what I could to address those spiritual needs, regardless of the faith or no faith of the individual. And I think people still, especially in extremists, still want to make that link with eternity. They want to realise that there is the love of God that surrounds them, and that love, you know, it's the classic eve of battle address taken from Romans chapter 8. Nothing in life or in death can ever separate us from the love of God. And somebody's got to be there to articulate that.
Does it make you anxious, this apparent questioning across the board of whether or not war should be undertaken?
Well, it is an anxiety, but it's not a new one. I mean, this has really been part of the business of going to war forever. I suppose it's more clear-cut now because we see it on our television screens minute by minute, the debate leading up to it, and then, of course, the event itself. We see it all there, so it's perhaps more immediate. But it's something that I think we probably know how to deal with in terms of preparing for war and concealing from the other side what we intend to do. It just makes it a little more difficult, I think. But certainly, I mean, to pick up an earlier point, it seems to me that there's probably no one more than a soldier who wants peace. You know, people professional soldiers who understand what they're about know that the last thing in the world they want to do is to go to war. But they've, as it were, undertaken to do so if the nation feels it's necessary. So, that, in a way, I very much hope that it will be impossible to go to war, but only if everyone else doesn't go to war too. And that's, of course, the great conundrum, that here we are, part of a democracy, where I think it is going to be increasingly difficult, except, as the Bishop says, except when we're obviously in extreme national danger ourselves, where, I don't think there'd be any difficulty, or indeed, when public opinion has been stirred up to the extent where there's a real drama going on in some other part of the world and something has to be done, then I think there's quite a lot of support for the notion of going to get involved there. But when it's for something less dramatic than either of those two things, I think it will be increasingly difficult to persuade members of democracies to go to war, and that's all fine and well, provided we're not attacked.
I think in some ways a very healthy understanding of the reality of evil might help people to resist what seems to be a rather sentimental view that nobody in this world really means to be mean, and if we only understood a little more or talked a little more, it could all be sorted out. And I think that this disinclination to confront challenges may have less to do with any particular religious faith and more to do with the circumstances in which we've been living for the last 50 years.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you all. Good night.
Now on ITV1, Jim Rosenthal presents highlights of the IRB Rugby Sevens tournament from Twickenham.